Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. So nice to see you all here. I'm going to just make one quick announcement, which is that after the conversation, there will be a Q&A. Please raise your hand if you have a question. We're going to bring you a mic so that people on the Zoom can hear your question. So I'm Janine Myleaf. I am the Executive Director and Chief Curator at the Arts Club of Chicago. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today. With our event today, we are moving toward the conclusion of Panafrica Days, a convening at the Art Institute of Chicago and around the city that has proposed many versions of possible futures that are marked by both rupture and unity. I can't really put into words what these joyful and heady conversations have inspired, and I really believe that we will be learning about the repercussions of them for a generation. It has been a week for the ages, and the Arts Club of Chicago is proud and moved to be participating with the current exhibition, Cosmo Whyte, The Mother's Tongue Pressed to the Grinding Stone, and with our conversation today. So on our stage, Cosmo Whyte is joined in conversation by his dear friend, Jeremiah Matthew Davis, a multidisciplinary arts professional with a background in theater, immersive installations, live event production, education, and artistic direction. He was on the leadership teams of St. Anne's Warehouse and the Diamond Horseshoe, and then was the inaugural director of Oklahoma Contemporary in its downtown campus. He has worked across performance and exhibitions with such luminaries as Mel Edwards, Jeffrey Gibson, and Ed Ruscha. We'll hear more about Cosmo as the talk unfolds, but as a brief introduction, I will say that he received his undergraduate degree from Bennington College and his graduate degree at the University of Michigan Stamps School of Art. His work has been acquired by the High Museum of Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, International Contemporary Art Museum Charlotte, the Perez Museum Miami, and the National Gallery of Jamaica, among many others. He is assistant professor of drawing and painting at the University of California, Los Angeles, and he has been a delight to work with, and I'm so grateful for the incredible exhibition that we're about to learn more about. So please join me in welcoming Cosmo and Jeremiah to the Arts Club stage.
Janine, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you and your whole staff, the team here at the Arts Club of Chicago. I think I speak for Cosmo as well when I say they have been fantastic collaborators, and so we thank them for their participation in Panafrica Weekend and for inviting me. I mean, Cosmo, it's obvious why he's here, but they didn't have to invite me, and I thank them for that. I also want to start things off by giving a big shout out to International Women's Day. Yes, and Women's Month, Women's History Month here. And in that vein, I want to give a special shout out to a special person here today. Mrs. Whyte, the artist mother, is in the house. Good to see you, Mrs. Whyte. She's great and not on a curve, by the way, so we're going to hear about this after the conversation. Cosmo and I met almost 25 years ago at Bennington College. Shout out Bennington. The Alumni Association has not talked to me about this. I don't know about you, but we're out here killing it. Hopefully somebody figures that out. But we met at Bennington 25 years ago, and we shared a passion for art, ideas, basketball, music, and really connected immediately. We met even before classes started and began collaborating really during our college tenure. I had the great opportunity to begin working with him before either of us knew what that meant, because we were in college. But one of the things we did in our senior year is we had an informal book club. We began to read theorists and philosophers that were informing our own work in the arts and the social sciences. And so we started a conversation discussion group, basically just the two of us. And one of the first scholars we really explored in an extracurricular fashion was the late Bell Hooks. May she rest in power. And so I wanted to start the talk properly. Yes, give a round of applause for Bell Hooks. I wanted to start with a quote by her from the introduction of her tremendous work, Art on My Mind. The uses of time, the choices we make with respect to what to think and write about, are part of visual politics. As we think and write about visual art as we make spaces for dialogue across boundaries, we engage in a process of cultural transformation that will ultimately create a revolution in vision. And I chose that quotation because I think it speaks to a lot of the work that Cosmo has done in his career, exchanging ideas, troubling boundaries between disciplines, interrogating borders, and hopefully igniting a revolution in the way that we see the world and the way that we imagine, the words of this weekend, possible futures. So Cosmo, let's kick things off. So right away, we're going to look at this mug that might be familiar to some of you. Cosmo, you began your career really as a painter. Your undergraduate thesis at Bennington, which I was honored that you invited me to be present to take notes of that critique from your professors, was 100% painting. Pretty quickly after that, you began to explore other modes, other disciplines, and you moved away from painting, and it would be a decade or so before you revisited the medium. And so you pivoted from there into multiple modes, including this project, which was a work of both performance and photography, and also began your really lifelong exploration of the archival. In particular, this work is in response in part to your upbringing in Jamaica, your understanding of identity, but also as your positionality as a son and engaging in the loss of your father from about 5 years before these particular works. So do you want to talk a little bit about performance, about archives, and about this particular photographic series?
Yeah, so this was the work that I applied to grad school with. This was part of the body of work applied. And what you're looking at here is a series of performances in which I was engaging, before I even understood what engaging an archive meant or constituted. I was just kind of naturally working through questions around grief, longing, belonging, and masculinity vis-a-vis my father's late ties. So after my father passed away, one of the things that we were left with was a great deal of ties. And I remember my mother asking me, what do you want to do with this? And right after he passed away, I went to the Maryland Institute College of Art for a one-year post-bac, and one of the very first assignments was a prompt to do a self-portrait, and a very crude version of this emerged. And it was also my first kind of foray into using techniques of obfuscation and masking and covering. And the first one, Heirloom, was prompted by, during the process of burying my father, I remember a lot of men coming up to me and saying, this is what constitutes Jamaican masculinity. This is what it means now. You're the man of the house. Even though any question that was directed to me, I had to then turn to my mother and be like, you may have the answer. I don't know. So yeah, and it felt overwhelming, but it was also a moment of interrogation of just the stifling parameters of masculinity as it was constituted within the Jamaican context. So the layering of the ties, becomes this suffocating moment at some point. Yeah.
How many works are in this series?
Maybe 10. Yeah, 10
Yeah.
different photographs. Yeah, and the second one you're seeing was a performance done at Lake Lanier in Atlanta, and at that point I was living in Atlanta and just craving being close to a body of water. But then I was also fascinated that this is land that is charged. It was seized by the government through what is it called? Eminent domain.
Eminent domain.
And it was also a black community that had experienced racial violence and was displaced. So it was another opportunity to engage with place in an interesting way.
Yeah, and I think that's going to come up multiple times throughout our conversation, the idea of place and responding to the history of specific locations. Another mode that you switched to and really dove in headlong as you began to articulate your work as a young artist was drawing. Yeah. I think this is an early example, Sweet Sweetback, which I think references the Melvin Van Peebles film, right, as well as probably some other elements. Cosmo, you began drawing processes of scraping, erasing, drawing again, building up layers of meaning, layers of composition, and often in grayscale, working in charcoal. Sometimes you're injecting other elements, as we see the gold leaf in the upper left register of the image. So in this case, we really see a palimpsest developing, something that I think viewers who have seen other works, for example, in the gallery downstairs, have maybe resonate with them. Can you talk a little bit about your engagement with drawing, both then and your ongoing exploration of the form?
Yeah, I mean, for me, drawing is the foundation of my artistic practice. It's my way of, thinking out loud. And even as I'm contemplating different projects or working through different ideas, it will always start with drawing in some form or shape. And then from there, I will start asking questions of, what does this project really need? Does it need to be within this form? But it always starts there. The scraping that you're seeing here, which is all the white marks, and I'm literally scraping back into the pulp of the paper. Within my own vernacular, I refer to it as keloids, or creating keloids, and thinking about keloids, which disproportionately impacts black skin or melanated skin, is this buildup of scar tissue on the skin that creates this kind of raised surface. And it's something that I have experienced within my own body, and I'm fascinated by it as a way of thinking of the body as keeping score, as keeping or recording history, and so
the body as archive.
The body as archive, yeah. So that's what you're seeing within this particular piece. Yeah.
And moving on to some work in a different modality, different medium. Anyone from Jamaica in the house? Yes. So you will be familiar, I think, with what this object may recall. So this is Soul Imperial. This is one work out of 3 in a series. One has yet to be realized. You also have another work engaging with some of the same ideas here and the histories of Jamaican sonic culture, processional culture. Just so everyone knows, we can't hear this, but this is a for real speaker box. This thing jams. So Cosmo, can you talk a little bit about your approach to this object and the sonic elements as well?
Yeah, so this was part of my grad school thesis. This was a grad school thesis piece. And so it has 3 scores. The third one is yet to be realized. And it's the stipulation is that once it finds a final resting spot, then I'll create a 3rd score to engage with whatever location that is. So I'll just talk us through the 3 different scores. The first score is a sonic mapping of the Black Atlantic. So while in grad school, I wrote a grant to do the transatlantic triangle trade, slave trade triangle backwards. So I would start in the Americas, specifically starting in Jamaica, going through, because I was familiar, I had lived so long in the South, going through Atlanta, and then from there, I went to London, specifically Liverpool, and then to Ghana, because I also have familial connections with Ghana, and then back to Jamaica. And when I had wrote the grant, I had all of these ideas of what the project was going to be, and then once I got on location, it shifted, things changed. And so I started just recording my journeys to different shorelines, and just in the conversations or anything that happened along the way to that journey. And so the piece is a compilation of all of those sound elements. So that's the first iteration. The second score is an interview with my uncle, Patrick Johnson, who also helped me build this piece. And in between breaks, we would eat food, drink Red Stripe, and just talk. And specifically, I mean, he's a great storyteller, and specifically, I was interested, the prompt to him was, tell me about dub, tell me about distortion in dub. Let's talk through that, and we just let him riff. And he started talking about a sound system that was in the neighborhood that both he and my mother grew up in. And the name of the sound system was Soul Imperial. And he just talked about how that sound system literally fed the community ecosystem. So if you were to throw a party, the sound system would travel to your party. Some of the proceeds from that party would go to your household so you can continue building your house. The vendors would make money from selling food at the party. That goes to, yeah, right. That goes to school fees and what have you. And he was also talking about the DIY nature of building the sound systems at that point of time in Jamaica, and how the materials and all of that led to this natural distortion that then became emulated electronically by producers. And so I was fascinated by that. But within the sound piece, we're drinking, we're talking, he's slipping deeper and deeper into patois as he's talking. So the sound piece also becomes a question about legibility as he's slipping deeper and deeper into his Jamaican tongue, right? And what I'm doing too within the physical piece is eliminating sections as it gets deeper and deeper into the conversation. So by the end, it's just the top tweeters, and it's beckoning you to get closer and closer to listen. So you're literally have to stand at the crescent of this wave that's crashing down on you. And also shout out to my cousin, Brandon, because we were building this thing, and he comes in and he's just like, "You should, this should curve. What do you think about curve?" And we literally looked at him and we were just like, "Shit, yeah, all right."
Cousin Brandon was right.
Yeah. And then like I said, the last score is TBD. Yeah.
Let me ask you a follow-up question. If the audience can see, Soul Imperial is spelled S-O-L-E Imperial. Was it S-O-U-L Imperial in the original iteration?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so you're...
I switched the name, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so moving... Yeah, why? Someone came from the audience. Why did you switch it?
Yeah, I mean, I also want to very subtly have a conversation about colonial legacies and the history of imperialism and how it intersects with Caribbean history. And yeah, so it's kind of like a subtle, by just shifting the title of the piece, also differentiating it from the piece that existed within this community.
Right. So anyone who's viewed the beautiful exhibition downstairs, Mother's Tongue Held to the Grinding Stone, will be familiar with the works that they're seeing here. This is a breakthrough for you, I would say, in your artistic journey. You began to play with paint again.
Yeah.
You're still engaging deeply with the archive here. In this case, photography, but you're also working with a different modality, one that is specific to many Black communities, African communities, African-American communities. That's the beaded curtain as a divider and as a boundary. In many cases, that would have been wood in the 1970s, but you're playing on that reference, the archival images, but you're completely transforming it into a new object that's not made just to be seen, but to be touched and felt and transgressed. Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about your process and innovating on this new body of work and your thoughts on its impact?
Yeah, so this piece was created for a solo show I had at Museum of Contemporary Art, Georgia. And it was an art award that came with a production budget. And I used the entire budget to make this piece. And that's how I had pitched the show to them. I had this idea of, I'd been thinking for a while about the archive, thinking about the archive as something that's living and breathing, and then if I understand it to be living and breathing, what does it mean to then interject a body as an agent of disruption to that archive? And how can I upend our traditional relationship to an art object? We're often told this is something we're supposed to look at, don't touch it. So what happens now if not only are you supposed to touch it, you're supposed to walk through it to disrupt the image? And also, I wanted this to be the first thing the viewer encountered at the exhibition. So I as someone who grew up with with a parent who was an architect, I realized, it's taken several years to realize this, that I'm sensitive to spatial awareness, sensitive to how we move through space, and I wanted to confront the viewer and change that dynamic of viewership and have them negotiate a physical space. So I was going through different iterations, trying to figure out how to make this thing, and at some point I approached a group of former University of Michigan classmates of mine who had formed a collective called Heckler, and together we worked through problem shooting, fabricating this piece. So it's made from metal beads, you know, like what's downstairs. There's a weight to it. What you're looking at is an image of the Brixton riots of, I believe it's 1981. And what I found interesting about the images I was coming across for the Brixton riot was that the photographer, oftentimes white, remained anonymous. So there's this tension between the photographer who chooses to be anonymous with the protesters who, through necessity, need to be anonymous, right? So it created an interesting dynamic for me, and I wanted to, for you, this is the first image you're encountering, how else are you thinking about what else is in the rest of the show? And on the other end of the curtain, didactic information is provided explaining what you're seeing, because I didn't want to hide, you know, the source material. And with all of these, I go through a long process of talking to the archive collection and acquiring the rights to the image. And, you know, through that conversation, larger questions come up around ownership, the ethics of using such images. How do you protect those that are being depicted in the image? So through this process of painting it on the beads, and it has to be painted in the round, so it's coated on all sides, there's a natural pixelation that happens, which is another way of negating this kind of surveillance. You can't use this version of it to like identify individuals.
Right, and of course, signaling back to your deep engagement with literature and theory, it's named after a famous James Baldwin book. So here we just have another example. This work is on view downstairs. It's called The Interlocutor. Yeah. In the case of the work as it's installed in situ here at the Arts Club of Chicago, it is not hanging at an aperture. So you can't actually move through it. It's hanging on a wall. But talk a little bit about your choice to have an intervention with the work so that people can engage with its kinetic qualities.
Right, so if I'm interested in these figurative, and they're all figurative pieces in which the figure is constantly trying to negotiate some kind of fugitivity, is always trying to escape from you. So you're looking at it, you have to view it from different angles to actually see it, because it's constantly trying to resist you, resisting some form of capture, right? And then you walk through it, which momentarily disrupts the image again, with it now not at a threshold, not at a boundary, not being activated by you, the viewer. It was an opportunity to just play around, and so I've bound half of it, and I've bound it with zip ties. Also thinking about the use of zip ties by police.
As manacles.
Yes, right. during protests. So half of it is bound. So you're seeing half of this image of a limbo dancer, of someone in the midst of bodily contortion. Also thinking about the limbo as this cliche of Caribbean performativity. Within the context of growing up in Montego Bay, Jamaica, the only time I've seen the limbo performed is within a tourist context. But outside of the limbo, we're all performing some form of limbo.
Sure.
Right. So.
Feats of contortion.
Yeah, right. So. Yeah.
So we have moving in a new direction, but also keeping with many of the themes, borders, boundaries, and interjecting a new one we haven't discussed yet as much. You mentioned it a little bit with respect to the lake in Georgia, but we have Flags of Convenience here, which is a newer work, so just created last year, was part of a show that you had at a gallery in Atlanta, using a new form that we've seen so far in this talk, at least, with silk screening. Do you want to talk a little bit about your approach to, again, mining an archive, injecting some themes of ocean, of the maritime, but also in keeping with some of the same strains of thought around resistance and elements of colonial legacies that are present in the archival image?
Yeah. Again, I grew up in a coastal city, Montego Bay, Jamaica. But before I even go there, as we were putting together this slide presentation, and I was thinking about this piece, I remember as a child, the sound of the cruise ships, the horn from the cruise ships would scare.
It's loud.
Yeah, it would scare me so much. And I remember there was one time it scared me so much that I ran under the bed and I had locked the door. And I remember my mother and my father had to negotiate with me to open the door to let them in, right?
Talk about boundaries, you know?
Yeah. Flags of Convenience is a practice by which cruise ships and freight ships travel through international water or sovereign waters by flying a temporary flag tied to that nation as a way of circumventing the taxes. And one of the main culprits of this are the cruise ships. The Queen Elizabeth comes to Montego Bay twice a week. I think it's like every Tuesday or Thursday. It stops in Montego Bay, and it does the transatlantic. It comes from, England, and I was fascinated about this idea of. I was questioning this idea of sovereignty and the ocean, and what you're looking at are images of different now archaic practices within the Caribbean, juxtaposed with images I have taken of the ocean as well, and some of them are practices of passengers throwing coins into the ocean as local Caribbean, typically young men, are on boats who then dive into the water to retrieve the coins.
As a spectacle for the cruise ship.
Right, and it brings up questions of privilege, of power, but I'm also interested in the position of the camera. So the camera is oftentimes situated in the boat. So situated in the larger boat.
The cruise ship, looking down.
Looking down, right? So what I was trying to do with this piece is also, like the curtains, confront the viewer with their position to the image, right?
Yeah, one of the things that you often engage with is ideas of agency or complicity on the part of the viewer. And this is another piece that has ties to maritime themes, but also I think introduces some of the ways that you trouble this concept of the viewer. We were discussing earlier, art historians, curators, collectors, museum professionals often describe the person who is looking at something or engaging with a work of art as a viewer. In a performing arts context, they're called the audience, which is the hearer, right, as an auditor. But in the case of many of the works that you have, including the works on view downstairs, you're not just asking someone to look or to view, you're asking more of that person. They're becoming a collaborator in your artistic process. They're seeing, they're touching. And in this case, though we can't experience it through the image, they're also engaging in the olfactory. Can you describe this installation?
Yeah, so when I was...
Struck glove, by the way.
So when I, in grad school, when I was doing that journey, that transatlantic journey, I didn't plan this, but I just so happened, when I was in London, it was part of Queen Elizabeth's...
Diamond Jubilee.
Yes, the Jubilee.
Something like that.
One of those.
One of the Jubilees.
One of them things. And I was fascinated. I was like, let's go to Buckingham Palace. Let's see this spectacle, right? And as I was walking through the gift shop, I saw a replica of her sugar bowl, and I just thought, well, I gotta do something with this. This is wild to me, and it was one of those moments where I was watching everyone, go through and collect their items. And
did you throw coins at the British people?
I should. It was one of those moments, though, where I was just again struck by the disproportionate ways in which we have to engage with history. For me, the sugar bowl is an object of horror, right? And so, I just figured I needed to figure out some way of engaging with it. So one first iteration of it was done in grad school, but I like to constantly rework, a piece until I feel, okay, this is its final version. And so this piece was done at Anat Ebji's gallery in 2017. And so it's soaked, the rope is soaked in rum, and then the sugar bowl is just perched precariously on top of the rope, and then filled again to the brim with rum. And the rum evaporates over time, so you have to constantly top it up.
But the smell does not go away.
The smell does not go away. So you walk into the room and you encounter this smell of rum. And I remember Montego Bay in the 90s, half of it was sugar plantation. And you understood the passage of time by when the cane was cut, when the fields were burnt. I also understood it as like, oh, right, by the time it's burning, we're getting close to finals, because I was in high school. I was like, I got to have my shit together, or else, right? So it's, but I wanted to harken back to that kind of relationship.
Yeah, I did not get to experience this in situ. However, I have seen some archival rope in your studio.
Right, yes,
and so there's more.
There's more, yeah.
Projects,
tons of ropes, yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Sounds
a lot of rope.
ominous. Yeah, that sounds ominous.
It's not like that. You can't do much with this rope.
Right, yeah.
It's old and busted.
Yeah, and oftentimes, can we just go back?
Please.
Oftentimes, these pieces are accompanied by these drawings of these heavily braided, anthropomorphized, ambiguous figures.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So I also wanted a relationship between the drawings and the braided ropes. Yeah.
Right. Also, rope being one of the primary modes of artistic expression for sailors.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And also, this is a rope that has two nooses on either end, so it's to tether a boat to a dock.
Or a loop.
Or a loop, we can call it. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It could be both.
Yeah, both.
So moving on to a new body of work that you've begun exploring recently, iterating on themes that we've seen before, of the archive, of the idea of collage and palimpsest. You've got this new work also on view downstairs, The Whaler and the Griot.
Yeah.
We haven't seen this yet in our talk, but you have begun moving from the type of pixelation you described in your beaded curtains to a type of literal translation of pixels or picture elements, creating these squared images that create a distorted whole composition, combining that with moments of more clarity or more hyperrealism. I also, as we were talking, what's not viewable here is in some of these works, you can see the registration marks where you're planing the grid, and you've made the artistic choice to keep your pencil marks and your grid. So if you get up close, you can see those elements of your first tracing, your first mark making on the page or on the paper. So talk a little bit about this new mode that you're exploring and how you're continuing to build on the ideas that you presented thus far.
Yeah, so again, thinking about how to render the image, the figure fugitive, and also engaging with an archive, what is my responsibility to protect the subject that is being depicted. And the entire show, I'm asking questions about what does it mean to be a witness? And these are questions that I was thinking about a lot. In 2020, I was living in Atlanta, and my studio became the epicenter. Well, it was not the epicenter,
But it was popping.
It was close, yeah, it was close. My studio was very close to the CNN headquarters in Atlanta, and that was a hotbed for social agitation, for protests, after Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed while he fell asleep in his car at a Wendy's. And I remember thinking, what does it mean to sit with what I'm seeing? What is my responsibility? Particularly at a time when we were inundated through social media with all of these images of Black trauma, and the very nature of social media means you're supposed to keep scrolling, just keep swiping, and I don't view that as witness. That's you're consuming, you're a viewer, but you're not a witness. Witness comes with
You're a spectator.
You're a spectator. Witness comes with a sense of responsibility, and by pixelating also. I'm asking you to slow down, which is the very nature of painting, this question of time and slowness. I'm asking you to slow down and to really wrestle with what you're looking at as the image either falls apart in front of you or comes together.
Yeah, I think a coming together and a rending apart are both ideas you can viscerally see in this work, including the inversion of the handstand. I think you're playing with those ideas very directly. Yeah. We're going to switch into the last.
And I just want to say, I purposely did not get into what this particular piece means.
Sure.
And that's by design. So when we get to the Q&A, I'm not answering that, okay?
And I'll note for our audience here, Cosmo is a very generous artist. Anytime someone has an interpretation, I've never heard him disagree with it. He's just open to many interpretations, regardless of what his intention was. That's not always the case with artists, so shout out for the generosity, Cosmo.
Sure.
We're going to pivot in the last part of our conversation and pick up really on some of the ideas that we began with in the images of the photographic self-portraiture with your father's ties. Yeah. What we're looking at is an image of one of the blueprints from Cosmo Charles Whyte, Cosmo's father, who was an architect, as he mentioned, very prominent architect who's worked on projects really all over the world. I know it's maybe difficult to see, but we just wanted to use this as a way to transition toward the conversation on space and architecture. Cosmo mentioned his understanding of space, really, he realized was developed in conversation with his father. And we've had dialogues surrounding how we interact with space, talking about ideas that were put forth by the philosopher Gaston Bachelard about histories that occupy spaces and resonate and echo beyond the time in which those things happen, but are somehow held in the bones of the building or in the architecture itself. So moving on to your direct engagement with architecture, we have this new series you're working on. This is the first example, 4x4 timing, Hush Now, Don't Explain. I love this. You and I have been talking about this for a while now. You went back to your father's archives, and you began digging through his blueprints, and you made a determination that you needed to collaborate with your dad. And by launching that conversation, you landed with this initial work, which is a dialogue with his drawings and plans, unrealized, works that were not built. Is that right?
They were not, at the time, I was looking at that time period when he didn't see them realized.
Right.
Also, shout out to my mom.
Shout out, Mrs. White.
Because she kept his practice going for several years after to see some of those projects through.
So posthumously realized. So your father designed them, but did not see them through construction, right? So you are looking at those plans, and you come up with an idea to combine them in those interiors that he's creating. And so you come up with this concept, the first of which you've developed and produced, but you have other ones. So do you want to talk a bit about this? This is one of my favorite projects you've ever done from a theoretical perspective, but we've talked about it a long time. I've seen drawings. I couldn't experience it until yesterday. I didn't get to see the show with Anat's gallery. Cosmo, it's fantastic. So just talk to me a little bit about your process of developing this and how you're, again, asking yet more of the participant or of the people experiencing your work.
And one of the reasons I wanted to have a conversation with you is you've spoken with my father.
I knew your dad, yes, and I have some things I want to share about his architecture practice because he put me onto it. Cosmo Senior put me onto it.
So what you're seeing here, as Jeremy said, I'm looking at these architectural drawings, but singling out the thresholds in these drawings and thinking about, okay, if we were to have a conversation, if we were to collaborate, where would my work fit within his work? And the image you're looking at is purposefully ambiguous. What you're seeing is young protesters engaging in a die-in in Ferguson to honor the 1-year anniversary of Mike Brown's murder. What I liked about this image was, first of all, they're lying on the floor and it's raining, and the first thing I saw when I saw this archival image was, I can't remember the last time I laid on the floor in the rain. What does that feel like? But also, I saw it within the lens of what Christina Sharp would refer to as wake work, in terms of honoring the dead, and I liked it for its ambiguity. You would approach it and not immediately read it as in terms of its specificity, but it raised hopefully would raise a lot of questions. And then by situating it within both a private archive, but also a structure that represents thresholds within a domestic space, so not just my private archive, but a private space with a public archive and a public space, I wanted to bridge those two moments of the private and the public.
And I want to, actually, we're going to skip ahead a little bit just for time, if that's all right, because I really want to get to this this last image. So this is a work on view in the gallery. You're, again, engaging with archives from Walter Rodney. If people are curious about this, please ask in the Q&A, because I want to close with continuing the dialogue about Cosmo's collaboration with his father. Again, we're just looking at images of the burglar bars downstairs in the gallery and some of the source images, both boarded up windows, but also burglar bars, as they're called in Jamaica, or window bars, as they're often referred to here in the United States. I first encountered this image just a few days ago, and for a half second, I thought of Kara Walker. And then I realized that this is a work by your father. And one of the things your dad told me in our conversations, I cherish those conversations that we had when I was first meeting him many years ago, but I asked him about his architecture practice. And he talked about his engagement with his engagement and critique of the Caribbean vernacular, his understanding of the British vernacular from his studies in graduate school in the UK, and further his graduate studies where he decided he wanted to go to Ghana and to explore the architectural vernaculars and the traditions of Ghana. And in his practice, he explained to me he was combining some of these elements and often thinking about these. In this case, you have a remodeling project he did, and what you told me today fascinated me about how he approached place. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so this is a shopping center in Montego Bay, and he was asked to remodel it. And to give you context, this is in the 90s. I'm a teenager, still in high school, and as he's remodeling it, well, before even getting deep into the project, he does research on the site. And I've been familiar with the type of research he would do in the past. He would oftentimes go to the site multiple times during the day, go at night to see how the light works, go to the site when it's raining to see how water moves through the space. But then this part was interesting to me. He was looking at the site historically, and through his research, he found out that this was one of the sites of the Sam Sharp Rebellion in Jamaica. This is the second. If I'm honest, there are historians in the room, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand it to be one of the largest slave rebellions in the Caribbean. And this was one of the sites of it. And so in his remodeling, he's using the vernacular of the fretwork to then honor that history. And as a teenager who, at that point, I had already decided I wanted to be an artist. That blew my mind. I was just like, wait, I love history. I clearly love art, but this is a possibility of ways of combining it. And to watch him go through the process of figuring out the history of this, it just blew my mind. And so I've been trying to, this fretwork is now in disrepair, but I also think there's something really beautiful about it. It's been battered by storms and just the sea air, and so a lot of the information has been redacted naturally by the climate, and I want it. The owner is kind of dragging his feet, but there's talks about restoring it in a way that is not, I don't think, quite honors this kind of research. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out how I can get my hands on it.
Oh, you're going to get those, and I can't wait to see what you come up with in your ongoing collaboration with your father. I want to close there. We could do this for hours. We do actually. Usually we hang out. It's like 6 hours of talking about stuff in his studio or at a restaurant somewhere. But I want to give a chance to the audience to ask some questions of the artist. Anything you've been wondering about, his work downstairs, his practice also as an educator. He's a professor as well, Professor Whyte. So any questions from the audience? We have a question way in the back, and if you would, please wait to begin until we have the microphone so that our virtual as well as our in-person audience can hear your question. Jenna is almost there.
Here we go. I'm coming. Someone almost died back here.
Howdy. Thank you both for this conversation. At the risk of asking a question you probably won't answer, so I'm going to forefront with that and make it quick. I find something really beautiful and valuable in how you create distance between the depicted subjects and the audience, the viewer. And of course, you express that through like abstractions and distortions. But can you speak a little bit to how that impacts how we, as also mirrored colonized subjects, view the interiority of these figures? How are we supposed to relate or experience their interiority as people and individuals? If you could just speak to that. I remain a constant fan.
Thanks. Thank you, TK. Oh, that's a good one.
That's heavy, TK. That was like 12 questions.
You're going to start off like that? Okay, all right. That's a really good question. Well, one of the ways I'm trying to have us engage with that interiority is of the subjects being depicted is for you physically to walk through, to feel how weighted those beads are, to confront an image that hopefully you question sometimes. Do I actually want to walk through this image? And then what I think there is a I'm hoping that one has to wrestle with your personhood when you enter into a room. So by rendering a space, a threshold that is what was previously open, by rendering it semi-porous with an image, and having you walk through it and then encounter your wake in the image afterwards, I'm hoping that raises another set of questions. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
If I may, Cosmo, I think in my experience of the works, it forces you to understand your impact in a space, how you and your body are changing space as you enter it and as you interact with it. And I think that positionality might depend on who the person is and whether they see themselves in the image being rendered or if they see the other in the image being rendered. But in either direction, you're asking them to think about who they are vis-a-vis this work and how moving through it affects who they are and how they're interacting with the work, if that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And I would also add that in regards to the drawings, by covering things, by restricting some of the image, it confronts your desire to look, to see, to know, and by so doing, I'm hoping you may have your own kind of questioning of your own desire for opacity. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Do we have time for more questions, Jenna?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. More questions from the audience. We have one here in the middle house left.
Can I do a shout out for the middle question
Yes.
asker? This is Angel Batoid.
Yeah.
Hi, Angel. Shout out, Angel.
Oh, yeah.
And that's Jaden. These two are performing in the gallery with Cosmo's show on April 2nd at 6 p.m. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you,
Angel.
Cosmo, for the invitation to engage with all your prolific work. And I'm
Thank
here
you.
because we're going to be responding sonically to the pieces downstairs. And one of the questions I had is, there's an elephant in the room that I see throughout all your pieces, which is a response to being in kind of a, not kind of, but being in a structurally racist post-colonial world. A lot of your work and a lot of my work is similar to that. So as you create these works and these thresholds, is it also like intentional protests in the way of disrupting worlds? You know, because like we can go through the beaded curtains, but on the other side, are we really going to that place that we're really talking about?
I mean, I view all art making as, well, I'll speak for myself. I view my art making as a form of protest. And so I try to be very intentional with everything. In terms of what's on the other end of that beaded curtain, I mean, my work resists trying to provide answers and rather tries to pose more questions. So the answer to that has to be, we have to figure that out collectively. You know, I don't, my job, I think, is to pose more and more interesting questions, hopefully more and more interesting questions. I don't know if that's answering your...
Can I back you up a little bit? And I'm not going to do it directly, but by paraphrasing the late, great Bell Hooks specifically about the artist's role. And if I'm remembering correctly, she writes, the artist's job is not just to tell it like it is, but to pose questions about possible futures or how it can be. And I think you are simultaneously commenting on what is and also asking what might have been and what could be.
Yeah, I think that's good too. Yeah. I'll take that.
I got your back, bro. What other questions do we have? We have one also similar part of the audience.
Hi, Cosmo. I want to thank you for your work as an educator. I work at the Museum of Contemporary Art. I manage our teen creative agency. And a few years ago, you did a workshop with our teens on your practice in archival images. They created a wonderful zine from that. Your practice still inspires them to this day. So thank you for that. It's a wonderful, wonderful work as an educator. I want to ask about your multi-century work and the piece with rum. What advice would you give to people who are seeking to incorporate elements such as smell or sound into their own personal archives? And also, how do you navigate those pieces within institutions that are very no smells, no...
Pest management policy.
Yeah.
Is this still on? Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, to answer that question, I'll tell a bit of a. Is it? It's not. Yeah, this is better. Thank you. To answer that question, I'll tell you about a piece I did for the Museum of Contemporary Art, Georgia, and I hope I don't get in trouble with them, but it's over. The show is done. There was a piece in that show, and I'm sure the curators are going to cringe a little bit when I say this, that was a carcass of a Norwegian codfish. It's salted, and for all of the promotional materials for the show, everything I gave them had the image of that piece in it. And then when it was time to bring the work in, and we were having this discussion, it was one of those cases where I was like, all of your flyers has this piece. At this point, you can't not put it in the show. But we had to have a discussion around, of course, pest control and protecting all the other works within there. But you know, it's a tricky proposition to bring in these non-traditional materials, particularly organic materials. You know, what I just described, that particular approach, is it the best approach? I don't think so. I think it's always great to be transparent, particularly when you're working with the curators. But you know, sometimes you just have to. I don't know. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. Yeah, right. Just do it.
Yeah. On the side of museum leadership, I have to say, registrars are really good. Yeah. Preparators are really good. They will figure it out. Yeah. Push for what you want. Yeah. Museums, yes, you got to protect the works. Pests are a problem, and on and on. And come on, hit the audience with the fire they want to see. You know. Yeah. Great question. Thank you. Do we have time for others, Jenna? One more question. So, who is the lucky winner? Raise your hand high. Cosmo, you see somebody over here?
Right here. Yes.
Right here?
You are so much closer to me than you are. I'm really sorry.
Someone was also, sorry.
That's you. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Isabel. Wonderful to hear you speak about your work and get to see it downstairs. I have a question about the relationship between you and your dad's work, particularly this one here that we're seeing, and what you said about the weather kind of like deleting that information almost, and how you deal with distortion in your work. And I'm wondering if you guys have had questions about, or like conversations about visibility and invisibility in your work.
No, I mean, I was so young. Yeah, we didn't get to having those kinds of conversations in person. Yeah, maybe now, you know. Yeah, through absence, you know, we can have those kinds of conversations through me engaging with the work. But maybe when I think back on the ways in which, in my very young self, was witness to how he was actively and sometimes very openly trying to critique what he felt was a problematic architectural vernacular in Jamaica. That questions of visibility, invisibility, who is this for, what are we trying to say about our conditions now. Those questions came up, as I was listening to him. The snippets I would hear of him wrestling with that within his own work. So, and maybe that has carried over. These things tend to like reveal themselves very slowly. So the answer to your question may reveal itself several years from now. To me, it's an ongoing process of reconciling our relationship, or of negotiating our artistic relationship, of collaborating. We started off with the images of the pieces with the ties, and that was my first kind of engagement with an archive of his. But it took years for me to be able to say, yeah, I can look at these drawings now, and it's overwhelming. It's a lot of those drawings. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cosmo, I think I speak for all of us when we say we look forward to seeing what you continue to do in your career and the ongoing collaboration you have in this case, but also the new ideas that you'll present and the new works you'll give to us to ponder, to consider, and to engage with. I want to give a thanks again to the Arts Club of Chicago and their sponsors. A big thanks to this audience for coming out today. Thank you all. We'll be around. Enjoy the other events of Panafrica Weekend. Thank you. Thank you, Cosmo.
I also want to say big thanks to the Arts Club team. It has been really a pleasure working with you all. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Cosmo.